That rickety old workshop needed to be removed, declared Lydia at the HOA meeting. Half a year later, she was the one forced to step down, along with her beloved gazebo, her extended driveway, and her HOA presidency. I stared at the demolition notice clutched in my hand, feeling heat crawl up my neck. The nerve, the absolute unrestrained boldness of this woman was something to witness. The Maple Crest HOA was ordering me to tear down my grandfather's 1952 workshed within 2 days or face daily penalties of $100. They even threatened to slap a lien on my entire property, all at my expense. I actually laughed out loud at the pompous, sugary tone dripping from the letter, as if it were written by royalty passing judgment. These self-important bureaucrats had no idea who they were picking a fight with. They'd been happily building their precious improvements on my family's land for years without permission. And now they wanted to dictate rules to me on the soil my grandfather carved out by hand. If you've got thoughts, drop them below, because I promise you're about to enjoy watching this entitled HOA tyrant receive exactly what she earned in one of the most gratifying takedowns I've ever had the privilege of carrying out. Let me bring you back to how all of this began. My name is Evan, and 6 months earlier, I inherited my grandfather's property in Maple Crest. 2 acres of pure peace with a main house, that old workshop, and a small pond where he taught me to fish every summer. Grandpa Raymond was a World War II veteran who returned in 1945 with nothing but roughened hands and a determination to build something that would outlast him. He cleared every patch of brush himself, mixed each batch of concrete by hand, and built that workshed log by log as both a workspace and an escape. The smell of cedar and old engine oil still clings to the walls like a memory frozen in time. Back then, Maple Crest was all farmland. Just a dozen families scattered across rolling fields where kids rode their bikes on dusty roads and neighbors recognized each other's dogs. But suburbs have a way of swallowing history whole. Now the area is surrounded by oversized homes with names like Brookshire Heights and Wellington Park, each house nearly identical, like someone squeezed them from the same tube of beige paint. The HOA formed about 15 years ago, supposedly to protect property values, which is code for keeping out anyone who doesn't drive a luxury crossover. The original families were grandfathered in, but tension simmered between us old-timers and the newcomers who moved in from coastal cities and immediately started measuring lawns with rulers. Enter Lydia Fairbanks, age 52, real estate agent extraordinaire, and the HOA president for the past 3 years. Lydia drives a pearl-white SUV with a vanity plate that says graced. And believe me, the irony of that word will shine through by the end of this story. Her hair is that very specific blonde that costs a fortune to maintain, and she's married to Carl, a weary insurance adjuster who has perfected the art of nodding quietly while she talks. Lydia moved here from Southern California 5 years ago and hasn't stopped preaching about neighborhood standards since. She's the type who times how long your garage door stays open and measures the length of your weeds with an actual measuring tape. The crunch of her designer heels on my gravel driveway should have been my first warning that disaster was coming. The first unfair strike happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Lydia appeared for what she called a routine inspection, which wasn't routine or even allowed, but I was still in my polite phase at the time. She marched around my property like she owned a stake in it, snapping pictures with her phone and muttering about aesthetics and community harmony. Then she spotted Grandpa's workshop like a hawk spotting prey. "This temporary structure," she declared, without even stepping inside, "violates our community guidelines. It needs to be removed." I explained as calmly as possible that the workshop wasn't temporary. It was built 7 decades earlier, long before the HOA existed. I told her about Grandpa Raymond, about family gatherings, about the childhood memories etched into every board. Lydia listened with that rehearsed smile real estate agents learn in training, then delivered the comment that still raises my blood pressure. "Well, that was a different era, wasn't it? We have standards now." She handed me a 30-day notice to remove the eyesore and strutted back to her SUV, leaving behind a faint scent of expensive perfume and the kind of entitlement most people couldn't fake if they tried. That night, sitting in Grandpa's old leather chair, wearing his worn work gloves that still smelled like sawdust and honest labor, I realized Lydia wasn't just targeting the workshop. She was targeting everything my family built, and probably anyone else who didn't fit her immaculate suburban fantasy. I had no idea she was about to make the single biggest mistake of her life. 2 weeks into my 30-day grace period, Lydia decided it was time to crank up the pressure. She shortened my deadline to just 14 days, claiming there was suddenly an urgent safety issue with the workshop. An emergency? That building had stood solid for 70 years through storms, blizzards, and who knows how many minor quakes. But Lydia wasn't finished flexing her HOA authority. She brought in a county inspector, who just happened to be her golfing partner from the country club, for what she called an impartial professional evaluation. The guy showed up in spotless work boots that had clearly never seen a real job site, spent maybe 10 minutes wandering around, and somehow managed to find exactly what Lydia was looking for. A loose board here, some faded stain there. Condemned structure, Lydia proclaimed with the level of delight most people say for winning a lottery jackpot. Health and safety threat to the entire community. I could have given in and accepted that sham of an inspection. A lot of folks would have. But Grandpa Raymond didn't raise quitters. And he definitely didn't raise someone who'd let a clipboard warrior erase 70 years of family legacy. My first counterpunch cost me $500 I didn't really have. Hiring an independent structural engineer to do a real inspection of the workshop. This man was the exact opposite of Lydia's golf buddy. Steel-toed boots caked with actual mud, rough hands that knew the difference between a load-bearing beam and decorative trim, and a reputation for saying what was true even when people didn't want to hear it. His report made Lydia's condemned ruling look like a bad joke. Not only was the building structurally sound, it actually surpassed current code standards. Grandpa Raymond had built that place to survive the end of the world, using methods they don't even teach anymore. The foundation went deeper than required. The joints were reinforced with hand-forged brackets, and every beam was chosen for maximum strength. But here's where things got interesting. While I was swatting down Lydia's bogus safety claims, I also reached out to the local historical society. Turns out a 70-year-old workshop built by a World War II veteran has a pretty decent shot at being labeled historic. The society rushed my application, and soon I had official paperwork proving the building existed 4 decades before the HOA ever formed. I also tracked down Grandpa's original building permits from 1952, still sitting in a drawer at the county courthouse. Seeing his neat handwriting on those yellowed forms, describing his plan to build a shop for peaceful pursuits, hit me with a wave of pride and resolve. Lydia's reaction to the engineer's findings was classic Lydia. Since she couldn't argue with the facts, she simply changed the playing field. Overnight, the violations shifted from structural danger to aesthetic non-compliance. Now, according to her, my workshop violated something called architectural harmony standards. Here's the small twist that should have tipped me off to her deeper agenda. She suddenly mentioned a long-standing design committee made up of herself and 2 of her closest allies. This mysterious committee had supposedly existed from the beginning and had retroactively approved every home in the neighborhood, except mine. Convenient, right? But Lydia's constant escalation was starting to wake people up. 3 of the original families, the ones who remembered Maple Crest before Lydia's tidal wave of rules, quietly stepped up to support me. Mrs. Klein, a retired schoolteacher from Birch Lane, began digging through old HOA meeting records. Diego Alvarez, who owns a local hardware store and had endured Lydia's harassment for years, opened up about his own experiences with her selective rule enforcement. That's when it hit me. This fight wasn't just about my workshop. Lydia had a pattern, and it was ugly. She went after anyone who didn't fit her rigid vision of suburbia. Single parents, people of color, seniors on fixed incomes, anyone who dared to be different in her manicured beige fantasyland. Her fans, mostly newcomers with investment accounts and too much free time, mumbled about property values and refused to meet my eyes when I tried to explain what was really happening. It's wild how fast people forget that what makes a neighborhood special is its character and variety, not endless rows of matching houses. The smell of fresh coffee during our little strategy sessions in Mrs. Klein's cozy kitchen became one of the few comforts in those tense weeks. These were people who remembered when neighborhoods were communities, not portfolios micromanaged by power-hungry agents. As I held those worn permits in my hands, feeling the fragile paper that had outlived Lydia's entire real estate career, I understood something important. This stopped being just about saving Grandpa's workshop. It had become about stopping a bully who'd been pushing around my neighbors for years, and Lydia had just handed me exactly the ammunition I needed to strike back. Lydia had no intention of letting facts interfere with her crusade. Within 2 days of receiving the engineer's report, she escalated again, this time slashing my deadline from 14 days down to just 7. And she added a new twist that made my heart thump in my chest. Daily fines of $100 would begin immediately. But she didn't stop there. She also threatened to slap a lien on my entire property if I didn't comply. That's right. Lydia was ready to risk my family's home over a workshop that posed absolutely zero danger to anyone but her fragile sense of control. Her social media campaign launched the same afternoon. Preserving our neighborhood standards became her rallying cry on the Maple Crest Facebook page, accompanied by carefully zoomed-in photos of my workshop that made it look like something dragged from a disaster movie. She rallied the newer residents using cheap property value scare tactics that would embarrass even the most desperate salesperson. "Do you want your home equity to drop because one neighbor refuses to follow the rules?" she posted, with a link to some phony article about non-conforming structures ruining community markets. Time for my second counterpunch. A far sharper one. I filed an official grievance through the HOA's internal process, something Lydia clearly hoped no one remembered existed. Turns out she had skipped multiple required steps when issuing her notices. The HOA bylaws were clear. Violations required written warnings with defined cure periods, mediation options, and the right to appeal. Lydia had bulldozed past all of these in her personal rush to tear my workshop down. I also contacted our local newspaper. The editor, Marcus Wu, who'd spent 2 decades covering suburban disputes, perked up instantly. HOA president targets veterans' family legacy. Exactly the sort of headline that draws readers and award committees. Meanwhile, our Save the Workshop movement on social media started gaining momentum. Dozens of people from other nearby communities jumped in with their own Lydia-like HOA horror stories. The hashtag #Raymond's Workshop began trending locally, and the Historical Society bumped my landmark application even higher up their priority list. But the deeper I dug, the more revealing the truth became. I started researching Lydia's real estate business, and the pattern that emerged was downright rotten. Lydia Fairbanks Realty specialized in Maple Crest listings. Of course it did. Her commissions were directly linked to property values here, which meant she had a massive conflict of interest. She was using her HOA position to benefit her real estate income. I found listings where she bragged about strict community standards as a selling feature. She was literally profiting off the same rules she weaponized against residents. Even worse, she had a habit of targeting older homes that didn't match her preferred uniform aesthetic, the ones she struggled to sell. Then came the mini twist. Lydia called an emergency HOA board meeting, stuffing the room with 5 of her 7 loyalists. She pushed through a vote to override the grievance process entirely, claiming that emergency violations didn't require appeals. My deadline was cut again, this time to 48 hours. I can still hear the sharp crack of her gavel as she forced the vote through. But in her rush to crush me, Lydia made a crucial error. Emergency meetings required proper notice to all residents, not just her inner circle. Word of her power grab spread fast, and the neighborhood began splitting into 2 camps. The Facebook group turned into a war zone, Lydia's followers blasting out petitions and dramatic posts, while the original families and long-standing residents threatened legal action against the HOA. Anonymous letters of support started appearing in my mailbox. Neighbors who were too afraid of Lydia to speak publicly, but still wanted me to know they were behind me. At the hardware store, Diego offered me free demolition tools with a wink. "Just in case you decide to tear down the wrong building," he joked. The man had endured enough of Lydia's selective rule enforcement to last a lifetime. Meanwhile, Lydia's drive-by inspections doubled, her sleek white SUV creeping past my home twice a day like some suburban patrol unit. She watched me through her tinted windows, phone raised, snapping pictures of every person who visited my property. The constant surveillance crawled under my skin. Being monitored like a criminal by someone who reveled in control, it messes with your head. The breaking point came when Lydia's husband Carl approached me at the gas station. He looked pale, exhausted, and jittery, like a man who had forgotten what real sleep felt like. He glanced around nervously before whispering, "She's serious about this. Maybe you should try to compromise." Poor guy, he looked like someone begging for a break from a storm he never signed up for. That's when I realized Lydia's campaign wasn't just tearing apart the neighborhood. It was tearing apart her own family. But compromise? With someone who'd shown she'd bulldoze my entire heritage just to prove she could? Not a chance. Lydia's nuclear option arrived on a Thursday morning I won't ever forget. A certified letter demanding demolition within 48 hours. This time served by a sheriff's deputy, as if I were some threat to public safety. The deputy looked apologetic, doing his best to soften the blow. "Sir, I'm just delivering paperwork. This isn't criminal, just administrative." But Lydia hovered behind him, arms crossed, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. She threatened to sue me for the HOA's legal fees, accusing me of dragging things out and costing the community money. Then came the line that exposed her true motives. My workshop, she claimed, attracted undesirable elements. We all know what she meant. That night, I watched from my window as Lydia's supporters drove slowly past my home, taking photos and filming every visitor. It was intimidation, plain and simple. I felt cornered. My lawyer told me the brutal truth. Fighting an HOA battle in court would start at $5,000, just to get in the door. No promises, no guarantees, and my savings account couldn't survive a months-long legal war, not while daily fines piled up. My insurance company wouldn't cover a dime of it. It felt like I was standing on the edge of financial ruin, all over a workshop that held every memory of my childhood. That night, I sat inside Grandpa Raymond's workshop, surrounded by his tools, flipping through the old leather journal where he recorded every thought during construction. His neat handwriting filled page after page, describing the joy of building something that could outlast him. Then I found the line that changed everything. "Bullies are like raccoons," he wrote. "You outsmart them. You don't outfight them." That was when everything shifted. While cleaning for what I thought might be the final time, I moved a loose board along the back wall and discovered a metal box hidden inside. Grandpa's handwriting covered the documents within, including his original property survey from 1952. My heart skipped. The boundaries did not match the current ones at all. According to the original survey, my land stretched 50 feet beyond what everyone believed, including straight through Lydia's backyard and right beneath her precious driveway. Suddenly, the entire game changed. I spent my last $800 hiring a professional surveyor, and honestly, it was the best financial decision I've ever made. The surveyor, Janet Fowler, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with 30 years of boundary mapping experience, arrived with high-grade GPS equipment that could measure property lines down to the inch. What she uncovered flipped Lydia's entire power trip upside down in the most poetic way imaginable. My property didn't extend just 50 feet past the accepted boundary. It reached precisely 53 feet, which meant Lydia's driveway, her $80,000 landscaping project, and half of her prized backyard were sitting directly on land that legally belonged to me. But that wasn't even the best part. The HOA's common area, where Lydia had proudly installed a $12,000 gazebo, something she constantly bragged about in real estate listings, was also on my land. Every improvement she flaunted as proof of her leadership had been built on property she had zero right to touch. Janet explained the situation in simple, devastating terms. The housing developers from the 1970s had relied on a flawed survey, which every subsequent deed had parroted without question. But my grandfather's original survey, meticulously done, carefully preserved, and recorded long before the subdivision existed, was the legally accurate one. In other words, the entire neighborhood boundary line was wrong. And guess who had handled the majority of Maple Crest's real estate sales for the past few years? Lydia Fairbanks. The impact was immediate and absolute. Lydia's demolition demands, fines, threats, all of it became legally meaningless. The HOA had no authority over any part of my land beyond the true boundaries, and I now held the right to demand the removal of every improvement Lydia had made on my property, or charge her retroactive rent for using it without permission. Fair market rent for that much land? About $1,200 a month. Over 15 years of encroachment? Roughly $200,000. Lydia's empire wasn't just cracking, it was one court failing away from collapsing completely. The moment Lydia realized a surveyor had been on my property, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, frantic text messages. Lydia was unraveling fast. A few hours later, her husband Carl showed up at my doorstep, looking like he'd aged years in a single day. His voice shook as he spoke. "There must be a mistake," he pleaded. "Lydia's been on the phone with attorneys all afternoon. We could lose everything." It was then I understood something important. This wasn't just about shutting down Lydia's obsession with control. This was about reshaping Maple Crest into a place where people weren't afraid of their own HOA. I could have destroyed her, financially, legally, personally. I could have demanded every dime, forced her to tear out every brick and blade of grass, and left her bankrupt. And a part of me wanted to. But I remembered Grandpa Raymond's words. Make your enemies into allies when you can. Outthink them, don't outswing them. I didn't want revenge that scorched the earth. I wanted justice. I wanted protection for myself, for the older families, for the single mom Lydia had cited 5 times in 1 month, for the elderly couple she harassed over their vegetable garden, for everyone who had ever felt small under her authority. With that in mind, I began assembling my team. The first to join was Diego from the hardware store. He brought decades of local knowledge and his own long list of Lydia-related grievances. "She fined me for having too many work trucks in my driveway," he said, shaking his head. Meanwhile, her friend kept an RV parked on the street all summer. Then came Mrs. Klein, our retired teacher, who had quietly kept copies of every HOA meeting record for 10 years. She had documented Lydia's drift from elected board member to self-appointed monarch in painful detail. Next was attorney Nina Patel, who specialized in boundary disputes. She believed strongly in justice and agreed to put me on a payment plan. "Your grandfather's records are airtight," she said. "This case is cleaner than most." Finally, there was Frank Dalton, Grandpa Raymond's old Army buddy. At 86, he moved slower, but his mind was still razor sharp. "Strategy wins wars," he told me. "Not muscle, not anger, strategy." Together, we created a 4-phase plan. Phase 1, file a quiet title action to legally cement the true property lines. Once the court recognized them, Lydia's improvements became undeniable trespass. Phase 2, demand fair market rent for the encroached land, but use it as leverage, not as punishment. The goal wasn't to bankrupt Lydia, it was to force reform. Phase 3, negotiate a full overhaul of the HOA rules, including conflict of interest guidelines, transparency, term limits, and protections against selective enforcement. Phase 4, ensure Lydia couldn't slip away quietly and repeat her behavior in a new community. Mrs. Klein's records were a goldmine. 23 documented examples of discriminatory enforcement. Cases where Lydia targeted single parents, minority families, seniors with limited income, while ignoring identical violations committed by her allies. According to Nina, any one of these could trigger a federal fair housing investigation. Financial calculations painted Lydia into an even tighter corner. Roughly $180,000 in back rent, another $80,000 in unauthorized improvements, plus likely damages if her past real estate sales unraveled under scrutiny. Lydia wasn't just in trouble, she was standing on a trapdoor that could drop at any moment. But Frank's wisdom guided us. "A victory isn't real unless it brings peace," he said. "Win in a way that ends the war." That meant building a case so overwhelming that Lydia would have only one option: surrender and accept the new HOA structure that protected everyone. Meanwhile, Diego quietly gathered information from around the neighborhood. Stories flooded in, people who had kept silent for years out of fear. The single mom Lydia fined repeatedly for having a work van. The elderly couple she bullied over a non-standard fence. The working families she targeted for messy yards, even while her friends' violations were overlooked. Our strategic meetings smelled of strong coffee and old paperwork, and every session left us a step closer to justice. We weren't planning revenge. We were preparing a blueprint for fairness, something Maple Crest had needed for a long time. Finally, Frank placed Grandpa's old brass compass in my hand during our last planning session. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said softly. "You're not just defending a building. You're defending the people who call this place home." It was time to bring everything into play. Lydia's desperation didn't fade. It intensified. The moment she realized I wasn't folding, she made her next move, hiring a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. The man, an exhausted-looking guy in a wrinkled suit, followed me for 3 days, snapping photos of me buying groceries and pumping gas like I was some underground criminal mastermind. Poor guy probably charged Lydia a hefty fee to discover that my wildest habit was buying too many scratch-off tickets. When the PI found nothing, Lydia tried something even more ridiculous: bribery. She approached the county inspector's supervisor, not her golf buddy, but the man above him, offering consulting fees for additional violations on my property. What she didn't know was that the supervisor had been keeping tabs on complaints about biased inspections for months. Lydia just added herself to the top of his list. Her frantic footsteps echoing across the county building's marble floor became a regular soundtrack. Her next scheme was even worse. She held a last-minute HOA meeting to increase my daily fines from $100 to $500. She packed the room with her loyalists and tried to force a vote through without notifying residents who would oppose her. Another massive violation of HOA procedure. But she didn't account for Mrs. Klein, who monitored those rules like a hawk. She documented every infraction Lydia committed in her power-hungry sprint. While Lydia lit fires everywhere she went, her social media attacks spiraled. She started referring to me as a dangerous neighbor threatening community standards, adding filtered images of my workshop that made it look like a condemned shack. Her smear campaign gathered a small, frantic fan club, people more concerned with their imaginary home equity drop than actual truth. But her biggest miscalculation came when she contacted my homeowner's insurance company. She claimed my workshop was a liability hazard and suggested I was running an illegal business out of it. Linda, the insurance investigator, inspected everything thoroughly and then delivered a verdict that must have driven Lydia up a wall. "This is one of the most structurally sound outbuildings I've inspected all year," she said. "Your policy benefits from it." Every official she contacted, health department, fire department, animal control, came, inspected, rolled their eyes and dismissed her complaints. But Lydia didn't stop. She made enemies of every county department along the way. Meanwhile, I was quietly archiving everything she did. Every message, every threat, every attempt at intimidation went into my growing evidence binder. I installed cameras to document her surveillance. Watching her creep by in different vehicles, trying to hide from my cameras, became almost comical. But my calmness drove her insane. I waved cheerfully when she passed. I kept working on the workshop. I acted like nothing she did mattered, and that made her unravel faster. Finally, Lydia tried to corner me directly. She approached me in the grocery store, her sunglasses failing to hide her exhausted eyes, and offered me $10,000 in cash to make all this go away. During her rambling attempt to negotiate, she accidentally confessed to bribing the inspector, snooping into my property records illegally, and several other violations. All of it was recorded, perfectly legal in our one-party consent state. Still, Lydia spiraled even further. She filed a restraining order against me, accusing me of stalking her. According to her sworn testimony, my friendly waves during her surveillance drives were threatening gestures, and my repair work on the workshop was psychological harassment. The family court judge who reviewed her claim dismissed it almost immediately, chastising her for wasting judicial resources. Her unraveling continued. She tried reporting my attorney Nina Patel to the state licensing board, claiming a conflict of interest. That backfired spectacularly when the board discovered Lydia had been giving legal advice to HOA members without a license. Her safety patrol, dozens of supporters circling my home at all hours, turned into something much darker. They questioned neighbors who visited me. They photographed Diego when he brought supplies. They confronted Mrs. Klein for suspicious visits. The irony was unreal. Lydia, who claimed I was harassing her, had created an actual surveillance mob. Behind the scenes, her life was falling apart. Carl confided to Diego that Lydia had borrowed $30,000 against their home, maxed out their credit cards, and was facing complaints from her brokerage over unethical behavior. "She's up all night," he whispered, staring at printouts and drinking glass after glass of wine. 3 HOA board members broke ranks, approaching Mrs. Klein privately to express regret and fear of legal consequences. County supervisors began investigating Lydia for her attempted bribery. The newspaper's investigation into HOA corruption was underway, and Lydia's trail camera, hidden in the woods aimed at my workshop, ended up on my property, according to the official survey. Illegal surveillance, trespassing evidence. The pressure finally shattered her. She erupted in public, screaming at elderly Mr. Sanderson over his fence height while neighbors stared in shock. She threatened to sue the newspaper, the county, and anyone else who disagreed with her. That night, Carl was seen at a divorce attorney's office. Still, Lydia scheduled one final emergency HOA meeting, the day before my court hearing, planning to officially declare my workshop in violation, hoping to box me in before the judge ruled. She even invited local media, believing she'd shame me into giving up. If only she knew. The Maple Crest Community Center was packed. All 47 households were represented, along with the newspaper, the county supervisor, and a sheriff's deputy. Lydia stood at the front with a massive PowerPoint titled, "Protecting Our Community Standards," ready to deliver her final blow. She launched into a dramatic speech about property values, pride, safety, and responsibility. Then she displayed warped photos of my workshop, calling me a threat to community unity. She motioned for immediate legal action and massive fines. That's when I stood up. "Thank you, Lydia," I said calmly. "I'd like to show everyone the real boundaries of my property." I connected my laptop. The map appeared on the projector. High resolution, GPS verified, undeniable. It showed the true property lines. It showed Lydia's driveway, landscaping, and backyard sitting squarely on my land. It showed the HOA's gazebo sitting on my land. It showed everything. A hush fell over the room. Then gasps, then murmurs. Lydia cracked instantly. She screamed that the survey was fake. She accused me of bribing officials. She accused the county of conspiracy. But I wasn't done. I clicked to the next slide. Calculations of retroactive rent, $180,000 worth. Then audio recordings of Lydia trying to bribe the inspector. Screenshots of her discriminatory enforcement. Copies of every violation she had committed as HOA president. Mrs. Klein stood. I motioned to remove Lydia Fairbanks as HOA president. Effective immediately. Diego. Seconded. The vote wasn't close. 34 for removal. 8 against. 5 too stunned to vote. The sheriff's deputy politely asked Lydia to sit down. She refused. She screamed. She accused half the room of betrayal. Reporters snapped photo after photo. Finally, the deputy escorted her outside. I then spoke to the room. I told them I wouldn't pursue back rent. I would deed the disputed land needed for community access back to the HOA for free. All I wanted was a restructured HOA with transparency, fairness, and safeguards against future abuse. The room erupted in applause. 1 week later, Lydia resigned. Carl filed for divorce. Lydia eventually moved out of state. Her real estate license was suspended. She disappeared from Maple Crest entirely. My quiet title action went through without a hiccup. Her improvements were removed at her expense. The HOA was rebuilt from the ground up. Diego and Mrs. Klein took leadership positions. Monthly potlucks replaced hostile board meetings. Mediation replaced fines. Grandpa Raymond's workshop became a beloved community tool library. The disputed land became a thriving community garden. A Heritage Day was founded to celebrate our neighborhood's history, old and new. Even the county took notice, using our story to promote fair HOA practices. And as for me, I got my grandfather's legacy back. 6 months later, my niece visited on a school field trip. Her classmates ran their hands along the old workshop walls, admiring craftsmanship built to last a lifetime. Hidden behind one panel, I found my grandfather's final journal entry. Sometimes the best way to beat a bully is to build something so strong they can't knock it down. The sound of children laughing outside, neighbors gardening, and families working together made me smile. This was more than a win. This was the community Grandpa always believed in.